Hello, and welcome back to Crypto Sapiens. I am your host, Humpty Calderon. And today we are chatting with Michael McGuiness, co-founder of gm.xyz. In our conversation, we discuss the different schools of thought on building decentralized social platforms, protocols versus apps. We also talk about how we can help the society at large learn and care about the value of decentralization. We also talk about decentralized social and the ways that it improves connections in Web3 and how we govern communities. There has been a lot of attention given recently to decentralized social platforms, and much of this is accelerated by the acquisition of Twitter. This conversation highlights some of the reasons why we're having these conversations, as well as featuring how decentralized social can improve the way that we make connections, find value alignment within communities, share content, and retain the value of the work that we're putting into these social platforms. There's a lot to unpack here, so without further ado, let's get started.
Yeah, so my name is Mike McGuiness. So I before Web3, it's funny enough, I worked in two different industries. First, I worked as a hedge fund analyst at a high yield, long short high yield hedge fund. So that's actually where I got exposed to Bitcoin, right? Just from a macroeconomics perspective, I thought the store value use case was pretty interesting. I Googled what's the best book on Bitcoin to learn more about it. I came across the Bitcoin Standard, read that, and I was like pretty all in on Bitcoin. From like, I think that was in like early 2018. And I was like, kind of like, it pains me to say this, like a bit of a Bitcoin maxi. Then I left my hedge fund job, went to work as a software engineer at this company called Common Stock, which is based out in San Francisco. It's kind of like Twitter, but you link your brokerage account. So it's investing social app. So worked as a software engineer there. And it was still very like Web2 stock focused. And I was going more and more down the Ethereum rabbit hole and just got super excited. And almost like since I started at Common Stock, I was like thinking about like ways to build in the space and what does the space really need and like the problems that you could solve with it. And I got really excited about this idea of decentralized social media, right? Like if you think about social media, it's something that touches pretty much every person in the world. And you have a handful of large tech companies that own all the world's data. And they get to censor what people see and do not see. It stifles innovation because people, if you have a different view for a feed algorithm for Twitter, for example, you can't really express that view. Right? Like unless you build Twitter from scratch, which is really, really hard to do. Actually building the Twitter app isn't that hard. Like a lot of really smart people could build that in like a couple months. I thought that was a really interesting problem to go after. And there was a couple of other solutions in the space, but I kind of disagreed with their approach. A lot of people are starting like protocol first or building their own L1 and saying, hey, we'll create this decentralized social media protocol, and then everybody build on top of us. I think the problem with that is that it's really hard to build on decentralized architecture. Right? Like we're kind of in the 1960s of decentralized architecture. It just hasn't benefited from the same 50 plus years of investment that Web2 architecture has benefited from. My view was like, hey, like speed and the number of iteration cycles you have are probably your biggest advantage as a startup and trying to compete against these incumbents. It makes sense to start out centralized first and then progressively decentralize over time, right? Because if you don't build something useful, then decentralization doesn't really matter in my view. And then it's only once you build something useful that you want to decentralize the data layer so that you can't, for example, like Twitter back before 2012 used to have open APIs and a bunch of people built on top of those APIs. And then all of a sudden when it started eating into Twitter's ad revenue, they pulled out the rug from underneath these developers that were building on top of them. So, right, like that's where decentralization can be useful because it allows you to make these kind of credible commitments that, hey, like, right, like the Chris Dixon phrase, instead of don't be evil, it's can't be evil, right? Like you can't change it. And people have strong guarantees when they're building on top of you. So I thought that was really interesting. I quit my job in September of last year with my brother, who's also a software engineer. We were kind of like talking about this idea for months. And normally I have a million ideas and he's like a little more measured and like reserved and thoughtful. And he's like, this one's actually a good idea. Let's do it. We quit our jobs in September of last year and we've kind of been off to the races since.
I want to start from this idea of like your first exposure to any decentralized system, and it sounds like that was Bitcoin. You called yourself a maximalist. What changed, right? Like, because I think, first of all, I'll agree with you in that Bitcoin tends to be that introduction to Web3 crypto for a lot of people. That's personally how I discovered it, right? I discovered Bitcoin before I heard about anything else, before I heard about Ethereum, before I heard about like all the other like crypto projects that were happening out there. That was my gateway. And of course, soon after discovering, going into the rabbit hole through local meetups, going on Reddit, on crypto Twitter, I learned there was a much wider ecosystem. But I wonder for you, what changed from being a maximalist to everything else that you are today?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I wasn't like a very harsh maximalist. Like I was very open to other people building cool and interesting things. I was just like, I don't really understand those use cases right now, but I understand Bitcoin. Right? Like it's very simple, the store value use case and why that's necessary in today's world of central banks kind of printing money. That made a lot of sense to me. And like the properties of money and kind of like Bitcoin's kind of salability and like permissionlessness was very interesting. What changed was I have a really smart friend who told me, he's like, you got to look into Ethereum, just buy a little bit. And I was like, okay. So I bought a little bit. And then like, once you buy something, even if it's just a little bit, you start paying more attention. It's like, oh, what's going on here? What's going on here? And then I think when it really clicked was I listened to Justin Drake's Ultrasound Money podcast in like March of 2021. And up until that point, I've been listening a lot, right? Like by that time, I was already listening to Bankless and trying to learn more about Ethereum and kind of all these other non-Bitcoin cryptocurrencies. And the way Justin Drake put it with kind of the development, this was before EIP 1559, the transition of proof of stake, and how it was kind of going to make Ethereum like a superior form of money to Bitcoin. And I was like, within a week of that, I like sold half my Bitcoin and just put it all into Ethereum. And then I actually wrote an essay. So I wrote this essay called Why ETH Will Win Store of Value that like helped me organize my thoughts. So, and I ultimately, right, like if you think about it, Ethereum, and this is solely money, like, right, like from a money perspective, not like kind of all the cool things you could accomplish with Ethereum, is like, it's more scarce after EIP 1559 and the transition to proof of stake. I mean, currently it's all, on-chain activities and transaction fees are pretty low right now, and it's still more scarce than Bitcoin in terms of a lower inflation rate than Bitcoin. And then also it made sense as more secure. Because when you think about Bitcoin, right, they have this issue where the block subsidies halving every 4 years, and transaction fees aren't growing because there's nothing being built on top of it, right? So you run into the security issue where kind of security spend for Bitcoin scales linearly, right? Whereas Ethereum, the security spend because of proof of stake will always be in proportion to the market value of the network, right? So I think Justin Drake did the math and it was like roughly like 10, with proof of stake, like the cost to attack the network would be roughly like 10% of, you'd have to acquire 10% of the supply, right? So if Ethereum has $100 billion market cap, you'd have to spend $10 billion. Right, like, and like right now, people say, "Oh, Bitcoin's fine because it's X billion dollars to attack it." But like once it, and Vitalik made this great point on a subreddit. He's like, once Ethereum or Bitcoin, if it becomes a $10 trillion asset, the people you have to protect against are larger and like larger threats, right? So the security aspect made sense to me, and then like the real yield as well from proof of stake. The ability to kind of have 4% or maybe it's like 6% after the merge, risk-free yield is really compelling, and it creates this real yield dynamic. And then there's organic demand, and I kind of compared it to how the petrodollar system cemented the US dollar as the global reserve asset. You could see something similar developing around that, where people need to pay for decentralized compute, and you pay for that with ETH.
So I think, thank you so much for that description. I think that's been wonderful. I think what you've proven is you definitely have put in a lot of thought into this, and your background, in markets, right? And being able to apply this type of thinking both to decentralized money. How does someone with that background, with that level of understanding, think about social decentralized social? Like, what is the transition? Were you building something in the social space? Or was this just something that you saw as a user of like social applications saying, this is a problem? And I understand the technology behind decentralized technology. I'm going to merge the two.
Yeah, well, so I did actually work at a consumer social app before this as a software engineer. So at Common Stock, I learned a lot about kind of building a social network and building community and stuff like that, and kind of like the technical architecture behind that to a lesser extent. But I think it really clicked when, right, so I was trying, right, so once I went all in on Ethereum, I was trying to learn more about the potential use cases, right? And there's naturally, you have DeFi, you have NFTs, and the one I think those are really cool, but like they'll never, like, it's hard to see DeFi. I think a lot of DeFi stuff will be abstracted away and used kind of behind the scenes by like larger institutions that it's tough to see my parents using like Uniswap or Compound or Aave, right? And then like NFTs expand a bit beyond that, and then I was kind of like wondering what else can this technology be used for? And then I forget where I first heard it, but I think it was Balaji was talking about, right, like if you kind of have this source of truth and kind of this permissionless data layer, how that allows for kind of permissionless innovation on top of that. And I thought that was a really powerful idea, right? Like it's very clear how these kind of data monopolies are affecting the public discourse. It's very clear how they're stifling innovation, right? Because it's very hard, like, right, like if you think about it, in the last, I don't know, 20 or so years, there's hundreds of social media startups every year, and maybe like 10 have have had a pretty big impact, right? So ideally, there should be a lot of really, just because this is something that touches the entire world, there should be a lot of teams like experimenting with different ideas, like on everything from censorship and moderation, right? Like all the way to different feed algorithms and kind of making use of new primitives, right? Like, for example, Discord walked back their Ethereum wallet integration, right? Like, and if somebody wanted to like build that, right? Like, and there's ways around it, right? You can use CollabLed and stuff like that through their bots, but like, it's very hard to build a crypto native version of Discord. I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to do right now. So I thought it was a super massive problem, and it made sense why crypto would be useful there. I think a lot of times people will talk about use cases that like may exist in the future, but it's very fuzzy of how it'll work, particularly around like real world assets, right? Like put real estate on the blockchain. And it's like, okay, there's like a lot that goes into that, right? Like you kind of need legal recourse and a lot of interaction with the real world, the physical world. And it's unclear how blockchains work there unless everybody views it as sovereign. So maybe those cases will come eventually, but social media is something that lives in the digital realm, and it's a massive problem, and it makes sense why a permissionless data layer would help a lot there.
Yeah, so it sounds like everything from your background, well, first of all, understanding really the power behind Ethereum and understanding what was broken in Web2 social really drove you and your brother to start up gm.xyz. There's something else that you said at the very beginning of this conversation that I want to also see if we can explore a bit before we really dive into the nuts and bolts of gm.xyz, and that is the comparison to other social projects that are starting at the protocol layer and how building on top of decentralized architecture is hard. There's one thing that I've seen other people talking about, and I tend to agree, and that is we also tend to focus a lot at the like protocol level of development and not so much at the application level of development. And it is at the application layer that we can increase demand and adoption for the technology, because people don't need to know how something works, right? Decentralization is a means, not an end, as I think I've heard other people saying as well. What are you, maybe describe a little bit more about your thoughts on kind of building these social platforms from a protocol perspective, and how building at the application layer is better for the ability to onboard people to use this application, or maybe even for other applications to collab with what you're building at gm.xyz.
So my brother and I talk about this a lot. I personally don't think the majority of the world cares about decentralization or like privacy, and right, like you don't really care about these things until you kind of need them, right? But like we care about them. So it's kind of like, how do you, right, like this is something that's good for society. How do you get everybody to kind of adopt these things? And like the answer, if you want to build more than a niche social network for only people who are fanatical about decentralization, is you have to solve real problems and build something that's hopefully 10x better than the current solutions. And that's where we started with GM. So our view was, if you don't build something useful, decentralization doesn't matter. So let's solve a real problem. And right now there's a massive problem that a lot of Web3 communities are wildly underserved by Discord, right? Like Discord's kind of the status quo. But if you think about Discord, it's really kind of a gaming chat platform that was never intended to be used by 1,000+ person NFT communities or DAOs, right? Like, so 100 people talking over each other in a Discord channel is a nightmare, right? Because everything's in chronological order. It's not sorted. There's no signal. Like if you're in 50 Discord servers and each one has 20 channels, that's 1,000 places that you have to click every day just to get caught up on all of your communities. And it was just never kind of built for what it's being used for today. So we saw that as a problem that we could start with and solve. So our goal, and the way we're thinking about it, is let's solve a real problem for people and build the absolute best home for Web3 communities. And then once you do that, right now there's kind of like millions of people in these Web3 communities, right? So if you could get millions of people to kind of bootstrap the network, then you could start building more broadcast use cases, right? So think like Twitter or Reddit. We're not trying to compete with Twitter or Reddit right now, because if you post something on GM, you versus Twitter or Reddit, you'll always get more likes and responses from Twitter or Reddit, just because we're way smaller than them. But what we can do is we can build a scalable communication platform that is Web3 native. It builds in things like token gating and reputation systems and governance voting and stuff like that, and all the things these communities need in a very intuitive and easy to use way that's easy to stay on top of. And then so that's our goal. And then eventually, though, once you have millions of people on there, you can start building those broadcast use cases. And then, right, like we kind of start putting our data on chain and decentralizing it and making it permissionless for anybody to build a client on top of us. Hopefully open source our clients and encourage people to fork us, because all we really care about is growing that underlying data layer. And then people can fork our web app, our React Native app, and build apps of their own for different use cases. So like, let's just say you don't really care about the community abstraction, you care more about the Twitter use case. You can like not have communities at all on your app and only just following people and posting to each other and build a Twitter style use case. So that's how we're thinking about it. And then we want, right, so basically build something useful, decentralize the data layer, and then decentralize the governance layer as well. So that's kind of our 3-step process.
So maybe describe a little bit about those processes themselves. So you're talking about decentralizing the data layer. Compare that for us to something like Twitter or Discord, and how you're able to kind of build something different powered by, decentralized technology. And why is that important?
Yeah, so right, like, so I know Twitter and Discord have some API endpoints that are open, but you can't go access Twitter's database, right, and build a Twitter application yourself that's just as good as Twitter using their data. So what we want to do is make it permissionless to build on top of us, to read and write to that underlying data layer, and not have us kind of control that. So that's where I think the value is. Kind of like, so the best example would honestly be Twitter prior to 2012, when there's all these different types of Twitter applications, right? And everybody had access to the underlying data layer, and they built all these cool use cases. And that's how you had a ton of innovation. Like, I'm pretty sure quote tweets were invented by a third-party client, as well as like replies and stuff that Twitter didn't think of, right? Like some entrepreneur who was building for a select group of users thought of that. And that's kind of like the world we want to facilitate. And we think right? Like what decentralizing does is it allows us to make that hard commitment that, hey, we're right, like you can build on top of us and we're not going to pull the rug out from under you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. So we were talking about Discord also a little bit, and in terms of the current use of that application for communities to come together and also not just to communicate, but also maybe to even govern themselves, right? We do see a lot of like this soft governance happening at the Discord level. And you were talking about how like currently, while there is no native way to kind of make sense of that, there are tools like Collabland that may allow you to kind of bridge some of that data over and create some meaningful interactions with that data. How would someone do something differently with like gm.xyz?
Yeah, so in GM, currently everybody signs in with a wallet. So everybody has a wallet linked to their account. And that enables us to do cool things, right? Where you don't have to stitch this third-party bot that people have to click on and go attach their wallets to. It just happens automatically. So you just, for your community, if you wanted to token gate it by your NFT project, you just paste the contract address in there, how many you need to have a certain role in your community. And then you can use that role to permission access to certain channels and like voting rights and stuff like that. So it's just native to the platform, and people don't have to like link their wallet externally, which is generally like not a great security practice. And then also, yeah, like you said, there's a lot of kind of soft consensus being reached on Discord via poll, or it's also a nightmare for a lot of community managers, because if you look at the way the governance process works today, it's like, hey, we have to, right, like I just submitted a proposal on Discourse, right? And then they paste it in Discord, and it's like herding cats to go, hey, go comment on this, and now go like vote on this. And then Discourse isn't Web3 native, so it's not token weighted when you vote. So you're running into issues there where your Discourse voting isn't matching up with your Snapchat voting. And there's a ton of issues there of just not being Web3 native and not having these particular communities in mind when you're building the platform. So those are a few of the problems we want to solve.
Yeah, that's very good. There's also these conversations happening around identity. And I know one of the challenges that's commonly discussed when it comes to Web2 social is that, or even outside of Web2 social, just Web2 platforms in general, is that any identity that you create on these platforms are not self-sovereign, right? So they're owned by these platforms. So any identity you create on the Facebook platform is owned by Facebook. Any identity you create on Google is owned by Google. Any data associated to that obviously is also owned by these organizations. What are some of the benefits? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, right? As someone who's developing a social platform that is very much built on top of this decentralized technology, what are your thoughts about the ability for people to join a platform like gm.xyz and generate an identity that may be composable, that functions outside of that platform? Like, what's the value to that?
Yeah. So, okay, two things on identity. First, on composability. And I think composability is one of the most under discussed aspects of Web3. I think it's going to be so important. And things that we want to enable is kind of putting your community reputation on chain, right? So if you think about it, right, there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work in these Discord communities, and they're getting no credit for that, right? Like, it'd be nice to have something similar to Reddit Karma, but just for your community, where people have points. And there's a lot of cool and interesting projects going after this and trying to put reputation on chain. Source Credit is one that I know has attempted this. Yeah, so right, like if you have that community reputation on chain, it becomes really useful because you can use it across the web, right? So if you go into, I don't know, your personal, right, like some website, right, you do a giveaway, only people who have X reputation within our community will be eligible for this giveaway. You can use it, you can imagine people baking these identities into things like lending platforms and, right, like unsecured lending, which is a big problem that like a lot of people are trying to address right now. So yeah, I think that composability is huge to be able to kind of take where your wallet address is really kind of like your username or your name, and you use it across all these apps in the crypto ecosystem. So I think that's like the first part of identity. And then the second part, which is more Web2 focused, but I think it's really important, particularly as it relates to Discord. On GM, you have a rich identity. So what I mean by that is you have followers, you have post history, you have your NFT collection, and it's really useful for safety. So if you think about Discord, all you have to go off of is basically a picture and a bio that people can kind of change to whatever they want. They can impersonate all these types of people or like these community moderators and DM people and scam people. And it's become a massive problem. I mean, I personally just have all my Discord DMs turned off and like all my servers on mute just because spam has become such a massive problem. But with rich identity, you can make more informed decisions around things like, oh, this person sent me a link. And then there's a big difference between somebody who has like 0 followers and 0 posts, and then somebody who has 2,000 followers and a rich post history and like all these great NFT collections. And it's really helpful to have this in terms of it's also helpful for connecting with other people, right? Because you can see like, oh, you're really interested in this subject too. Or you have this, and you're a holder of this NFT or token as well. And it can help facilitate that connection as well. So yeah, those are the two: composability and kind of like this rich identity, I think are things that we're really focused on at GM.
Yeah, I like that. One thing that I've been thinking about and that I've shared with other projects that are building social platforms, and I'll share it with you, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. One thing that I think Web3 identities, right, these rich identities that are self-sovereign, that are composable and reusable across a variety of applications like gm.xyz, I think presents an interesting opportunity that isn't available in the traditional Web2 space. And that is, when you go to Facebook does Google Plus or Google Circles, whatever they used to be called, social platforms still exist. Like when you went there, the discoverability of like-minded individuals is, it's not really good, because it isn't really comprehensive or acknowledging kind of like the extension of your identity beyond maybe just a single platform. With Web3 identities like my own, for instance, if I have an ENS, and if I have certain NFTs in that wallet, if I hold certain governance tokens of a DAO, if I've participated in governance in those DAOs, if I've supported public good funding through platforms like Gitcoin, for instance, all of this really is building up a very rich identity of who I am, who I choose to represent myself as in Web3. It's interesting to consider how all of these different metrics or touch points in my Web3 identity could be used within a social application to then help with the discoverability of other like-minded individuals. Are you at gm.xyz kind of giving consideration to like how you can organize or recommend people to one another to organize amongst themselves based on these like variables or metrics of their identity?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So right now, our focus has been mostly on kind of getting communities onboarded so that there's a ton of really awesome communities that you can join when you sign up for GM. So our focus is more on that now. And then, right, like once we have this critical mass of communities, our focus will probably turn towards helping funnel people into those communities, right? So you own a Bored Ape NFT, right? Like you should join the Yuga Labs community, and then you should follow these other 10 apes and connect with them and shoot them a DM. And then, it really, that's our goal. And that's what we think it should look like, because you have exactly what you said. You have kind of like all this rich data that lives on the blockchain that not a lot of people are making use of right now. And you can do it in really interesting ways. Another interesting way too, that we've been discussing internally is that you can kind of make your DMs more open by not having to turn them off. And what I mean by that is like, if you think about, I don't know, somebody like Kevin Rose, right? Like who has 1 million followers on Twitter. I don't know, maybe his DMs are open. I don't know off the top of my head, but imagine his DMs are very hard to go through. But if you start bringing like tokens into the equation, you could say like, hey, only proof holders or moonbirds can DM me, right? And there's a lot. So what it does is it allows him to kind of connect with his project holders. And that's another kind of selling point for communities too. Right? Like if you launch an NFT project, it's very opaque into who's actually holding your tokens, right? So, but if you go on GM, you could kind of like find those people and help like kind of bring them together into a community and like rally against your cause and your mission.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's two things you touched on there, and I think both super incredible feats when we do get the opportunity to kind of build or actually build our communities in that way. And one of them, this idea of like ape follow ape, but in a much more Web3 native way, right? where it's not like we have to do a hashtag and discover other people that are using that hashtag. And really, how can we verify ownership, right, on a Web2 platform? Well, maybe they actually paid for Twitter Blue to be able to, show that PFP and show the provenance of it. But, in a Web3 native platform like gm.xyz, this all happens, natively. This is just the way that it's programmed. The other thing that you were talking about just now is this whole interaction between communities or individuals with shared values, right? This idea of like DMs that are restricted to just certain communities based on, ownership of certain assets, right? It'd be even interesting to take it a step further and be like, I want to curate this community based on early adoption of this asset. I don't, if you hold that asset today and you paid, 15 ETH for it, well, great. I still want to hear from you. But there is a certain level of reputation, if you will. If you came in early, if you believed in this project early and you joined, when it was like 0.05 ETH or whatever, it'd be interesting to start seeing the different opportunities when you segment communities in that way, or when you curate communities in that way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I honestly think we're so early in what NFTs can be. Like, if you think exactly what you said, right? Like, even something like CryptoPunks, right? Like, a lot of those people were super early and they're very cool people in crypto. But at the same time, the fact that anybody who has $100,000 to spend can go out and buy one, it feels somewhat suboptimal. And I actually had a tweet on this pretty recently of, I bet that a lot of NFT projects, particularly like super high status ones, will be kind of, you won't be able to buy them. They will be kind of, right, like a very curated list of people who it will be given to based on, right, like your reputation within that community. And I actually think that's a more equitable way of going about it, just because it's no longer just capital based, right? It's kind of like this social capital element where if you, if you're a thoughtful writer, or if you help out a lot in the community, right, you earned, right, like you could kind of earn these assets through, right, like, because when you're talking about assets and you're kind of like only letting people connect with it, there's like, right now it's mostly just kind of money based, right? It's based on what you bought rather than what you've done. And hopefully I think NFTs will trend towards that. And then it creates an even more like a richer surface area to kind of innovate on. And honestly, so up until this point, we've been more focused on kind of building a lot of table stakes kind of features that go into, it takes a lot to build a chat platform, right? And innovating on like design. And we've been more focused with like allowing people to kind of the communication platform aspect of it. But I'm really excited to start using these Web3 primitives in really unique and interesting ways.
What are your thoughts in terms of, the transition from Web2 to Web3 native applications in the social space? Obviously, you're building one and you're kind of staked to the success of Web3 social. What are we missing right now, just generally, in terms of like adoption by not the small niche community that we are, but outside of it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think a lot of things need to be abstracted away. So, right, like people don't even realize what's going on behind the scenes, where like a wallet setting whatever asset and having to check Etherscan to make sure it went through, right? Like a lot of that just needs to be abstracting away, and kind of like the equivalent of using Venmo rather than MetaMask to send ETH, right? And I think that's one of the reasons I'm most excited about Web3 social. Like, so kind of what we were talking about earlier. If you think about, right, like DeFi is super, super important, but it only appeals to a very small subset of the global population. NFTs definitely appeal to more people than DeFi, but still there's a lot of people who like don't quite get it, right? Or like they'll never really be interested in kind of buying like a monkey PFP, right? And they'll always be against it. But honestly, social is something that kind of touches everybody in the world, and it could be a way, if done thoughtfully, to show people why kind of these Web3 primitives are extremely useful, right? Like what happens when everybody has essentially a bank account linked to Facebook, right? Where you could receive payments and you can connect based on like the assets you own or the things you've done, right? With POAPs, it gets like you can prove that you've actually done something, and then you could take your identity to other places on the web. It's really, really interesting. And honestly, one of the things I'm most excited about with social, because it could really onboard the next billion users into Web3.
I like how you frame that. You really, I think, brought it together and talked about the distance from maybe the average user, even in the Web2 space, even to these types of interactions with finance, for instance. Like in the population of the world, what percentage is participating in TradFi, right? Not talking about owning a bank account, because even that, there is a small part of the population, because there's a lot more that are unbanked, right? But even the ones that have bank accounts, how many of those are investing? How many of those are actively investing, not just put it into some sort of yield fund and hoping that it gains enough interest over time? How many people are collecting art? How many people, like going into the NFT narrative, how many people are collecting art? How many people are supporting their artists by going to their concerts and buying their music? But then going to the social aspect of it and seeing the growth, a rapid growth of social spaces, and how many people that use the internet are using social applications, right? It's quite a large swath of the population. So we start looking at different ways to engage communities who are interested in these applications in the traditional space, and then carry that over into the Web3 space by really powering it up using this decentralized technology. And I agree with you. I think, firstly, we're social beings by nature. So, really being able to like engage with other like-minded individuals, talking about our common interests, doing it over chat, doing it over video, just all of these social elements are hugely important to, I think, us as human beings, to then transcend that and actually talk about social from an ownership perspective, from this more equitable perspective. I think that that's really interesting. And so I'm personally very much interested and fascinated by the work that's being done in decentralized social.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. And all of those things that you touched on, we're super excited about as well.
Yeah. So I guess maybe to wrap it up, why don't you give us like the next 30 days, 6 months, 1 year for gm.xyz? What are you hoping to achieve in the near future and the long term?
Yeah, so kind of in the near term, what we're really focused on is building a really great product. Because like I kind of said in the beginning, like you need to build a really great product if you're actually going to be serious about competing with Discord and like kind of these Web2 software platforms. So right now we're focused on building a great product. What we have is we have a wait list of communities looking to launch on GM, and we onboard them and we're talking with them, learning about their problems. They're giving us lots of feedback. And we're kind of iterating and making the product. It's honestly getting better every week. So if you can follow our weekly updates on GM, and we're shipping new things. The products we have a goal of making the product 5 to 10% better every week. So we're just shipping. There's still a lot of things that we need to build, like voice is one. People write like something like Twitter Spaces or Discord stages is something that a lot of communities need. We're actually innovating on some things that Discord doesn't do. So if you think about one thing that I think that drives me nuts about Discord is you can't leave channels on Discord. So you can only mute them. And then you can hide those muted channels, but still it's annoying. It should be more like Slack, in my view, where you like join a community or a server and there's a few default channels that are applicable to everyone, right? Like, because if you jump into a Discord server, all 70 channels are not relevant to you. There's probably maybe 2 or 3 in each community. And then what it also does by having opt-in channels is you can create actually more. It allows you to create more channels because you don't have to worry about cluttering the channel namespace. So if you're a 1,000-person community and 5 people want to create a book club, you can create a channel for that book club without having to worry about it bothering everybody else. And then new people can find it, and it allows for all these interesting changes in community structure. So we're honestly focused on you. So that's something that we plan on shipping in the next 2 weeks or so, which should be pretty exciting. But stuff like that and voice and really kind of building all this cool functionality is our focus now. So building a great product, then onboarding more communities, right? We want to get to a credit. Well, right now you have to kind of go through us and do this waitlist process just so that we could build personal relationships with all these community managers and learn more about their problems. But then once we feel like we have a truly great product, we're going to open up the platform more. So we're going to allow anybody to just create a community and allow for kind of this right, like kind of like right, like this serendipitous community creation is, and then once you have this critical mass of communities, then you can start building kind of more of those broadcast use cases. And then as we're doing that, we want to start, hopefully in the next year or so, productionizing our APIs and getting more serious about decentralizing the data layer once the product isn't changing as much. So right now the product's changing literally every day. We're shipping code every day, and it'd be a nightmare if we had to like kind of migrate our data models on decentralized architecture. It's really, really hard. And I don't even know how to build voice in a decentralized way. But our hope is that like kind of this decentralized architecture will also be, if I had a bet, like decentralized architecture, right? Like there's a lot of really brilliant people building really awesome things like Ceramic and tools like and Arweave and Filecoin. They're building all these interesting things, and our hope is that like they'll be much better even 12 months from now, right? Like, so that's another advantage of focusing on the product first, is that best practices for decentralizing your data layer are probably going to look dramatically different in the next 6 months, let alone 12 to 24 months. So that's another advantage of focusing product first. And then hopefully we can contribute to that too. Once like we're not iterating on the product as much, we can start decentralizing the data layer. And then after that, decentralizing the governance layer.
All right, that's amazing. So the last question that I normally ask is, this could be someone on crypto Twitter, this could have been someone that you read a book from, but who has been the most influential in your crypto journey?
Tough question. I would say a lot of Balaji's ideas I found really interesting, particularly his ideas around social. Like I don't have that many original ideas. I like steal a lot from really smart people like Balaji. So right, I would probably say like read Balaji's book, The Network State. He's like talking about really, really interesting ideas. So and he kind of imagines, like his imagination is just kind of wild in terms of like what he's thinking about. So I'd probably say Balaji's probably impacted my views on crypto the most.
Okay, that's wonderful. So I'm trying to get a number of people's recommendations, and this also helps us to be able to reach out to different individuals to come on the show. So thank you for that. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Love to learn both about you and about gm.xyz. Didn't know this was a family venture. I think that's really rad. I think that
my brother's right over there. He's coding right now.
There he is. All right.
He's locked in.
Yeah, definitely. So this has been really wonderful. I look forward to being able to continue chatting about what you're building, and maybe even seeing if there's additional ways that we can collaborate in the future too. So thank you for your time.
That sounds great. Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for sticking all the way to the end with us. If you'd like to learn more about Michael and gm.xyz, you can find them on Twitter. Michael at MikeMCG0 and gm.xyz at gm.xyz. Please don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. It truly means a lot to us. And give us a 5-star review too. That helps extend the reach of this content and connect to more people like you. And if you enjoyed this conversation, you can check out our archive at cryptosapiens.xyz. Until next time, stay brainy.